This episode of the Device Talks weekly podcast is brought to you by our speaker series, Device Talks Tuesdays. Join us this Tuesday at 4 p.m. Our friends from Celestica will lead a conversation about overcoming product development barriers. For more information and to register, go to devicetalks.com. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everybody, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome back to the Device Talks weekly podcast. I hope you had a great 4th of July. We are happy to be back with you. We'll be resuming our weekly schedule for the rest of the year into the holidays. I imagine maybe a brief blip for Labor Day, but let's not talk about that now. Let's not wish away the summer. Even though it's cold and rainy here in the Boston area, it is still early July. So let's push forward with today's podcast. We have 3 speakers for you today. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to try to do things slightly differently going forward with the podcast, at least when I can. For those of you who know about our Device Talks meetings, we really try to build those into 5 different areas or build those with 5 different components. One of them is innovation and investment. The second is product development and prototyping. The third is manufacturing and sourcing. Then we have regulatory reimbursement, and then we have new tools and technologies. So going forward, when I can, I'm going to try to include some themes into these podcasts. Not every episode will be this way, but when there are opportunities to sort of give you a deeper dive into one of those 5 areas, I will do it. And today we're going to focus on investment and investors, both public and private. First, you're going to hear from Danielle Antalffy. She is a managing director of medical supplies and devices at SVB Leerink. She is an analyst, of course, and she covers, she's got a long list of companies that she covers. She covers most of the major ones, but she wrote a report recently on home-based dialysis. So we're going to talk about that. In that conversation, we'll talk about Baxter and Outset and some other companies. We'll also extend the conversation a bit to talk about medtech IPOs, the importance of device companies having some sort of remote connection component to their devices. And this is something we hit upon in a recent Device Talks Tuesdays hosted by S3 Connected Health. So Danielle was, this is her first time on the podcast. She will be back because she was a lot of fun to talk to. Then later in the podcast, we're going to present sort of part 2 of the deeper dive we're doing into the investment in Cleerly Health. Cleerly is a company that is using AI and imaging to develop a better diagnostic for cardiovascular disease, specifically a better way to prevent heart attacks. The company recently raised $43 million for a Series B, and the investors included Vensana Capital and LRV Health. So we're going to talk today with Tripp Peake of LRV Health. He's a managing partner there. And Justin Klein. Justin is a managing partner of Vensana Capital. We had Justin on the podcast a long time ago, and I've known Justin for a long time. It's great to have him back. So in this sort of part 2 of that deeper dive feature, I'm going to talk pretty deeply with Tripp and Justin about how they came to learn about Cleerly Health, and really, I think the nuts and bolts. I try to get at the nuts and bolts of what goes into building a syndicate. So I hope anyone out there who's interested in understanding that process will find that conversation useful. So that's what we're doing this week. And now it's my pleasure to bring back my podcast partner, Chris Newmarker, executive editor of Life Sciences at Mass Device. Chris Newmarker, how are you, sir?
Good to be here, Tom. Happy Friday. We're doing this on a Friday again.
We are doing it on a Friday. I am getting pelted by the remnants of Hurricane Elsa right now.
That's delightful.
Nice little storm outside. So quite rainy and cold.
That is one thing I do not miss about living on the East Coast, living in New Jersey, was having like a storm like that come up the coast. Like, do not miss that.
Well, thank God your weather in Minneapolis is mild. And
mild all year long. Just, extreme weather in Minnesota? No, never.
Never happened. So I have an update for you, Chris Newmark. Since we didn't have our podcast last week, I would have shared this little anecdote last week, but we did not talk. But I can now, I've mentioned my AirTag experience before. I have the AirTag for the car keys.
Yeah.
I can now report that an AirTag fully survives going through the washer and dryer.
Congrats.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the car key does not. But the AirTag was fine. But yes.
I had an experience like that with a car key recently. And, the nice thing is now you can just look up a YouTube video. I could look up a YouTube video on how to pop my key fob to put in a new coin battery.
I actually was able to reassemble it and it worked, but it did break into 3 parts, but reassembled it and worked. Now I have a backup key, so I'm quite happy. But anyway, for anyone out there who's interested in keeping track of their car keys, the AirTag does survive a washer and a dryer.
That's awesome. I'm going to get some of those. That sounds great because I'm in your boat. We have moments like where are the keys? Where's the
It happens to us all. So
yes.
All right. Well, we are. Did you give us the top 10 stories since we gave you last week off, or you're just bringing 5? What? All right.
No one wants to hear 10 stories. Come on.
All right. We'll stick to the formula. We have our 5 new markers, newsmakers. Chris, bring us into number 5.
Number 5, we've got Conformis and Stryker settling a patent infringement case that went back to Wright Medical, which Stryker acquired. So the deal is that Stryker's going to make a one-time $15 million payment to Conformis, and in return, they'll get a non-exclusive license, when it comes to some conformist patents that were in question in this case. But, that was one of the big trends we saw during the pandemic was like there were so many legal cases getting settled. It seems to be continuing even as we, knock on wood, get out of this thing in the U.S. So it's like an age of Aquarius for medtech industry litigation.
Peace to us all. Yeah, that's an interesting one though. I would have guessed that. Conformis and Mako were sort of rivals way back, and then Stryker bought Mako. But this patent issue was with Wright, which Stryker also purchased. That was over a shoulder implant, correct? Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, and so it was. It was like a Conformis Wright patent spat, and now Wright's new owner Stryker is settling, and specific shoulder instruments and related components were involved in the patent dispute.
Good stuff.
That is done. They've made peace. It's great.
Excellent. They'll move forward, and we can move forward as well to number 4 on the new markers newsmakers.
So Siemens Healthineers won FDA clearance for their Magnetom FreeMax MR scanner, and this is kind of like the bigger, better, whole body scanner out of Siemens Healthineers. One little fact about it that I thought was really interesting was that they were saying it was the most lightweight, compact whole body scanner. So how much do you think that thing weighs?
A whole body scanner? Gotta be
whole body MR scanner.
Gotta be at least 20 pounds.
No, it's only 3.5 tons.
Oh, okay.
It's only 3.5 tons.
It would be more then.
In the world of MR, that is light. It's light. It's cool.
Chris, it's funny you brought this up because this weekend I need help moving my FreeMax magnetic resonance scanner. Are you available to come by? I'll have pizza later on.
No, I'm getting some root canal work this weekend. I got to get that all done.
Damn it.
Got to mow the lawn too. Sorry, man.
Fine. I'll ask you around here. All right.
Maybe you can find a neighbor kid to help you.
Before we get into this interview, I did want to once again remind you that we have scheduled our Device Talks in-person meetings. We rolled out our 2022 schedule. We'll be meeting in Boston on May 10th and 11th. We'll be in Minneapolis on June 6th and 7th. And we'll be in Santa Clara. Our Device Talks West meeting will be held on October 19th and 20th. So look forward to providing you more information there. Stay tuned. We'll have some interesting ways to get the news out. And of course, I look forward to seeing you at one or all of those meetings in 2022. Well, Danielle Antalffy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tom, so much for having me. Love to be here.
It's great to get the view from Wall Street or from wherever we are these days in the land of remote. But
yes.
I know you're still paying close attention to all that's going on, and you'd written a report recently that I wanted to follow up on, and you were kind enough to send along about home-based dialysis, and it's an interesting space, and I want to dig into it a bit more. But one of the companies you're focusing on is Outset Medical. We had Leslie Trigg on the podcast when the company went public. It's one of those companies, when it came out, it sounded like what they were working on maybe would happen 5 or 10 years from now. And I'm just amazed that it's found traction so quickly, and that it's really becoming reality. I don't know if it's just the fact that I'm older now and things just seem like yesterday when they're really not. But I think there's more to the story than that. But how would you characterize home dialysis prior to the COVID-19 pandemic? Was there a movement?
Yeah. Well, so if I could give a little context here.
Please.
I followed this space now for over 10 years. I actually covered a company called Next Stage Medical, which was the pioneer really in home hemodialysis. So specifically hemodialysis. There's also peritoneal dialysis, which is home-based as well. And Outset is home hemodialysis as well. So I had covered Next Stage for over 10 years. They actually got acquired by Fresenius Medical, which I think is, as folks may know, is one of the largest dialysis service providers here, well, globally and also here in the US, but they also are a manufacturer and provide products on top of service. So for the last 10 years, I've been waiting for home hemodialysis to take off because it makes so much sense to me from my perspective of like, of course, wouldn't you prefer to dialyze in the home? And also more frequent dialysis leads to better outcomes from a clearance perspective. You need fewer ancillary drugs. You generally speaking do better, not to mention, the quality of life benefit of not having to go to a dialysis center 3 times. However, as you noted, this is something that has been stagnant at, call it 2%, 2.5% penetrated of the total dialysis market for the last 5+ years. So I do think that the COVID-19 pandemic has helped at least magnify or highlight the benefits of dialyzing in the home versus in the center. But I actually would say, I think, and I'd be curious to hear what someone like Leslie would say about this. I think it helped, but I think there's also a lot of other factors that is starting to drive what I do think, and you probably saw from reading my report, is an inflection point in home dialysis adoption. And I use dialysis as a broader term, again, including both peritoneal dialysis, the major players there are Baxter, Fresenius, as well as home hemodialysis, which is Outset Medical, and Next Stage, which is now part of Fresenius. But what's happened, and it's sort of all happened at once. So first of all, you had regulatory changes or a regulatory initiative, I guess I would say, that is leading changes from a reimbursement perspective. And that is the AAKHI, the Advancing American Kidney Health Initiative that was implemented by the Trump administration and is targeting 80% of new patients getting on starting dialysis, starting in the home versus going into a center over the, I forget the exact timeline. I want to say it's like 5 years or something like that. I have to tell you, Tom, every center that I've spoken to, medical director, nephrologist, thinks that target is pretty lofty. But whatever. I mean, right now, between home hemo at 2 to 2.5%, peritoneal dialysis at like 14%, we're only at 15% or so of the total population dialyzing in the home. So there's a lot of runway there. The AAKHI then in turn drove some changes from a reimbursement perspective. The ETC, it's a treatment choice payment model that really drives better reimbursement for home dialysis and is really going to, I think, be probably one of the bigger drivers of putting patients into the home from the center's perspective, breaking down some of the barriers for the center, because reimbursement has always been an issue for home hemodialysis, for peritoneal dialysis. So that also happened. You had that.
So this is all prior to the pandemic. This is exactly all. These were all moving forward in that direction. All moving in that direction.
Exactly. And so, right. So in actually 2018, 2018, I think, was when the AKHI was first announced, and the ETC payment model, which not all said, just to be clear, it's kind of a it's in a trial mode right now. Not all centers are participating in it, but essentially what it does is it penalizes you if you don't have a certain number of patients doing home dialysis, and it incrementally reimburses you if you do have hit a certain target of patients doing home dialysis. That sort of came into effect, I want to say this year, more recently, but the AKHI was announced by the Trump administration, I think in like July of 2018. Okay. So happened. Then you have the COVID-19 pandemic happen, which no surprise here. Everyone's at home. People are scared to go into physicians' offices, dialysis clinics, and really highlighted the benefit of having an option to stay home. And then on top of that, Tom, you have technology evolution. And this is where someone like Outset Medical, but I would also argue Baxter and Fresenius on the peritoneal dialysis side come into play. And, there are a lot of barriers to adoption for home dialysis, first and foremost of which is ease of use and comfort. So the Tablo machine from Outset is very easy to use. And from a comfort perspective, both Outset Medical and Baxter have two-way communication between the nephrologist and the patient. So nephrologists can basically track their patients in, quote, real time. And it makes it a lot less stressful, I guess I would say, for the patient, sitting here doing essentially what is a life-saving procedure. You're getting liters of blood removed from your body, cleaned and put back in. That could be a scary thing to do in the home. And it gives them a lot more comfort knowing that they have this sort of safety net with the remote capabilities of the two-way connectivity for Tablo on home hemodialysis and the share source technology that Baxter has on their PD machine. So I would say it's those three things: regulatory, the COVID-19 pandemic, and technology evolution that really are driving this inflection point now post-pandemic. Well, I can't say we're post-pandemic yet. That's
no kidding. I guess we it's good to have that, but you're right. I catch myself from time to time. How was the industry sort of able to shift gears during the lockdown when hospitals were inaccessible, or was there much shifting going on over the past year and a half?
Yeah, well, so I think from a chronic dialysis perspective, when you're talking about bedside in the hospital, I think that that's actually something that drove higher adoption of a device like the Tablo. We call that the acute market, the in-hospital segment. So we're talking less about the sort of going to a dialysis center market and more of the when you're in the hospital and you need to be dialyzed. And I've talked to folks that we're dialyzing this one physician, nephrologist. She's based in New York. And as you know, early in the pandemic, New York was slammed from a COVID perspective. And she said they purchased Tablo machines for their hospital, and they literally would have, because there's no water source, there's no water treatment room necessary for the Tablo machine. It filters the water itself in the machine. So you just need a hookup, a water hookup, like a faucet. And she said they would have patients lining the halls dialyzing, hallway to the hospital. Wow. So I think that's where they pivoted from a technology perspective.
That's quite an image to imagine the patients in the hallway like that.
Yeah. And then I think also just from a chronic, the dialysis center perspective, I think telehealth, you'd hear this across probably any healthcare segment, that telehealth is definitely something that has been adopted more. And telehealth is something that's going to enable more home dialysis. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm hearing, because it makes it easier for the physician to access the patient, and it increases that comfort level that I talked about when you're doing a quote scary-ish procedure at home like that without a healthcare professional. You feel like they might, they are only a phone call away, and so I think that really has helped these centers adopt or embrace home dialysis in a more meaningful way than they have prior to. But other than that, I'm not sure from a dialysis perspective, a lot changed. I mean, the industry was impacted. You might already know this. But just these patients that are end-stage renal disease patients, they're very susceptible to COVID and they don't do well. So the mortality rate for these patients has gone up during the COVID-19 pandemic. So the patient pool has actually gotten smaller, but presumably as we come out of the pandemic, we'll return to normal, which is sadly an industry where the patient pool is growing low single digits perpetually.
Oh, that's tough. So what assurances do you have that things will remain in place or keep moving in this direction after hopefully when we're really past this pandemic when we're going back to business as usual? I think we're even seeing, I think we're already starting to see some pushback on telehealth. It's not going to be as easy as it was. I don't know where the insurer is going to go in paying for that sort of thing. Is there a danger of moving backwards, or is this cat out of the bag and there's no getting it back in?
I am a little bit more of an optimist versus a pessimist. So I do lean towards the latter, Tom, that the cat's out of the bag and it's not going back in. I do acknowledge that telehealth is a piece of this, and we'll see what happens from a reimbursement perspective there. But I do feel like once a center is invested in a home program, they're invested. And so I think the key here is that on top of it, beyond just COVID itself, I think this is why the other two factors are very important. Technology has gotten a lot easier to use and has enabled, like I said, that two-way communication that increases the comfort level for both the patient and the physician. And also there are more reimbursement incentives now for the program. I mean, and on top of that, I actually don't cover Fresenius or DaVita, but Fresenius was kind enough to do a call with me during this deep dive on the renal space that I did back in June. And Fresenius has committed to getting I think the target was 15% of their treatments in the home by 2024, I think it was. Well, they're already almost there. I mean, I think the last quarter they were at 14.6% or something like that. So to have the commitment from a major dialysis provider like Fresenius, on top of all these other factors that I mentioned, I mean, it feels like finally the industry, the walls of resistance are coming down and the industry is shifting. And I don't think it has been moving at a glacial pace, but unfortunately, much like we have with climate change, those glaciers are starting to melt more quickly. Absolutely.
No, that's a great point. So how do you think other medtech sectors will be impacted in how they're viewed by investors? Are you, as an analyst of these companies and future companies that may be going public, how much are you weighing their ability to have these remote connections, to offer home-based capabilities? I mean, I think we're seeing advances in diabetes treatment. There's a stronger connectivity there. Are we going to see more and more of medical devices needing to offer this to really provide the maximum value for patients, but also for investors?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think remote monitoring capabilities were becoming increasingly important, quite frankly, even before COVID. What I think COVID did was shine a magnifying glass onto the need for remote monitoring capabilities versus really, create the need, if that makes sense. So I think that it just exposed the need versus created the need. And I think that it probably accelerated the transition to more and more remote capabilities. You hear companies from Edwards Life Sciences, and they make transcatheter and surgical heart valves, and they have a critical care segment talking about AI capabilities and investing in companies that do AI too. You mentioned the diabetes companies, continuous glucose monitors, and the remote capabilities that they provide for a patient to monitor their blood sugar. I think every single company out there today is talking about some component of remote, whether it's remote monitoring or AI data collection to improve outcomes for patients and to push more therapy into the home.
So that's definitely of your list of things you're looking at, that definitely is a box that you need to check when you're evaluating a company.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'd love to get your thoughts on just a couple of other companies. I know you cover NeuroPace. There's a company I've covered for a long time, and I mentioned on the podcast before. It's like one of the first really cool medtech stories that I kind of fell in love with. It was great to see them go public. What's your take on, well, just a broad question about where they're going? And if you, I don't know if you've written any reports on where they're headed, but I also would love to, after that, get your thoughts on just where the IPO market is. This may be more of an investment banking question, but it seems like we're seeing an interesting IPO market, even beyond the SPACs, which just kind of add another crazy element to it. But what's your thoughts on NeuroPace? Where's it headed?
I really like this company. I like the stock. We actually recently initiated, obviously post IPO, and we have an outperform rating. We have $30 price target on the stock, so lots of upside we see from a stock perspective. This is an interesting company. I have also followed this for quite some time, Tom, and if you've been following it for a while, you probably know this was very much more of a science-focused company. Mm-hmm. And over the last 3 years, it's really transitioned to a commercial organization. And one of the number one questions I'm asked by investors is why now? This product's been approved, and this product being their RNS, the responsive neurostimulator for drug-resistant focal epilepsy patients. Why now? This has been approved for a number of years. Why is now the time that they're finally seeing traction? And it's because of that. It's because this was previously a very science-focused company, which quite frankly was not the wrong thing to do. It gave the ability to evolve the technology, develop. This is a company that has very important remote capabilities, allows physicians to remotely program and prescribe and change therapy for the patient based on what they're seeing from the data collection they're getting from the RNS system, what it's implanted in the patient, which is pretty phenomenal. So it enabled the technology, the science focus enabled them to develop the technology to where it needed to be, number one. And number two, it also enabled them to build the clinical data set. I mean, they had 9 years of follow-up data on patients showing the benefit of the RNS system in this very undertreated patient population. The stat I look at when thinking of this patient population, drug-resistant epilepsy. So these are patients that have already failed, I think it's 2 or 3 medications, and they're getting, they still are plagued by seizures. And there's 50,000 of these patients out there. And a portion of those are this focal patient population. But of the 50,000 drug-resistant epilepsy patients, that's an incidence number. That's per year that enter the system. Only 16% of them get an intervention. 84% of them continue to be managed on medication, even though it doesn't work. It's amazing. And NeuroPace, I think, is going to really shift the paradigm because they're the first company to come along and offer a really targeted epilepsy product that it stimulates. On average, I think it's only 3 minutes a day because it senses when a seizure is starting, that's when it stims, versus you think of other implantables like vagus nerve stim or deep brain stimulation. They're stimulating based on a program. So they're stimulating as it's programmed versus when you're seeing a seizure start to occur. And then the other intervention is surgical resection, which has its own issues, right? I mean, that's a very effective procedure. However, you have major side effects. So I think that NeuroPace is really going to change the paradigm in interventional epilepsy care. And I'm really excited to watch it happen.
And just a quick follow-up on the IPO market. I mean, I guess you sort of answered the question. I mean, NeuroPace did go public. It's obviously been around for a long time, but it also has reached a commercial stage. Are we at a point where we're just seeing a whole crop of medical device companies get to that stage where they're mature enough to go public, or has public investor appetite for earlier stage, still somewhat untested medical device companies? Has that increased? Are public investors more willing to take a chance on medtech? I
think definitely the latter versus the former. I mean, if you look at where companies are going public from a revenue run rate perspective, the majority are going public at a much earlier stage. I mean, even we talked about Outset Medical, and when they went public, I mean, their revenue run rate was relatively low for a medical device company. Medical device companies, and maybe this is a better, I don't want to play banker here, but based on my my experience, medical device companies, really, you're talking about generating something of on the order of 50 to 100 million in revenue before you are viewed as able to go public with a clear path to profitability. So I think that the appetite for investors for earlier stage companies has definitely gone up. I think what investors want to see is there has to be a TAM story, total addressable market story here. That's an acronym. TAM is thrown out a lot. TAM expansion story and large TAMs. And so large addressable markets, undertreated patient populations like NeuroPace is going after, like Outset Medical with home dialysis, with only 15% of patients treated in the home today, only 2.5% of those on home hemo. So that's what investors are focused more on, that and less on the current revenue generation. So I think that it's definitely the latter.
That's great. No, I mean, that's fair. I think that's how pharma gets valued. I think that's how tech companies get valued. So
sure.
medtech has always had to kind of provide more to go public. So excellent stuff, Danielle. I look forward to having you back on the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
All right, let us move on to number 3 on the New Markers Newsmakers.
Well, number 3 on the list, we got media reports out of Maine that Abbott's laying off as many as 400 workers, there in Westbrook, Maine, as a result of a drop in demand for COVID-19 diagnostics. And we reached out to Abbott Media Relations about it, and they didn't have anything else to add about it. But layoffs are tough. I mean, I guess the flip side is that at least the reason it's because we're at least. There are parts of this country right now where COVID's getting worse. I mean, if you're down in the deep South, but, at least in places where like we live, like in Minnesota, Massachusetts, the vaccine rates are pretty robust. It kind of feels like we're getting out of it where we are. So, and when, the extra thing about that is that there's a lot less, fewer COVID tests being made. So
that is too bad. I've got family up that way, just a little bit north of there. So that's a lot of jobs for. It's a lot of jobs, 400. But you're right. The reason is good. Hopefully, we'll find those folks will find a way to find a new job. Yeah, hopefully. Yeah. It's interesting too. I mean, they're cutting those jobs in Maine. At the same time, we also had a, story this week about how they're, Abbott's selling its StarLimbs informatics product suite to a global investment firm, and this suite's been used by a whole host of companies for more than 35 years. So, but then again, it just looks like it's just something that my educated guess would be that it's just not something that's like core to what Abbott does these days. And so, it almost seems like a summer of belt tightening maybe over there. Yeah. I think we're all sort of looking at what our priorities are. And you're right. This was the StarLimbs was used as you wrote, in biotech, chemical, food and beverage, manufacturing, environmental, public health, forensics. So basically everything. Yeah. So Abbott's definitely positioning itself for the post-COVID world. So, all right. Yeah. Let us move into number 2 on the New Markers Newsmakers. Well, number 2 on the list, it's more tough news. We've got a FDA classifying a Medtronic angiographic, hope I pronounced that right, angiographic guide wires recall as, class 1, its most serious kind. So just another, Medtronic's had a few of those this year. I did a quick analysis, before I jumped on here, and, it looks kind of like this year so far, we're kind of appear to be on pace to kind of get back to the level of serious recalls that we had in medtech back in 2019. 2020 was down. FDA was busy with a few things last year. I don't know what. But, procedures were down as well. So yeah. Procedures were down as well as you're catching less stuff. But this year, we definitely have a lot more. And I don't know, it's an interesting question. I mean, Medtronic, Medtronic's the largest medical device company in the world. So, it looks like they've got, just glancing at it, looks like about a fifth of the serious recalls this year involve Medtronic, but, if you're a giant company making a bunch of stuff, that could make sense. So looking at the numbers, are we back So they were down last year. What about the year before? Were you sort of on pace with 2019 in terms of number of serious recalls?
It looks like we're about on pace,
Yeah. Okay.
or maybe a little bit ahead, but, it looks like it's not like, somebody who isn't doing enough of analysis could be like, oh, wait, recalls are way up in 2021. And, it really looks more to me like it's, we're getting back to what we usually, would see, because we seem to be, on pace to be, on level with 2019 or a little bit ahead.
Yeah. Well, obviously one recall is a recall too many. So hopefully we'll see a slowdown in the second half. It would be nice if we. Here's
to hoping that goes down. It's good. Obviously it seems like this year they're catching a lot more problems, and we're getting a lot more things taken care of. So.
All right, let us roll then into the number one new markers newsmakers.
Oh, number one on the list is that we're back to robotic surgery. We got Levita Magnetics announcing their first procedure with their magnetic robot assisted system, and this is kind of like a robotic system that is that when they say magnetic, this is like using magnets to move tools inside the body so you have less incisions. So just a really interesting concept, and they had their first procedure with it, reduced incision laparoscopic. Let's just say it was a gallbladder removal. And, this happened in Santiago, Chile, which, that's kind of interesting too, because I know Medtronic, when they were recently announcing their first Hugo procedure, that was in Chile as well. Appears to be a different doctor, different hospital, but seems like Chile is a place to try out your robotic system first.
It's interesting to see this again, because when back in the day when Intuitive was just emerging, there was and still is a company, Stereotaxis, that had a magnetic robotic system, and they were sort of two parallel technologies that were going after the same market. So it's interesting to see this in fashion again. I don't want to say fashion, but to hear about it again. I need to learn more as to what are the benefits of using magnets as opposed to just straight robots. Be an interesting story to follow for sure. We'll have to get them on the podcast. We've had a lot of robotics news lately. And next week
ton of robotics news.
We'll be talking with CMR Surgical, and we'll talk with their CEO. And they recently raised $600 million. So we're actually seeing some huge numbers in robotics financing. And I'll talk with Adam Sachs of Vicarious Surgical about their post SPAC life. We'll talk about the SPAC process.
Yeah,
and they have a cool new facility with a bit of a history to it. So we'll get into that next week.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I know they're opening up new digs in Massachusetts. So that's awesome.
You'll have to tune in next week, Chris, if you want to find out.
Come on, nothing else.
Nope, that's all.
Teasing that out, man. You're just teasing it out.
All right, now we'll begin our deeper dive into the recent $43 million Series B round by Cleerly Health. First, we'll speak with Tripp Peake. Tripp, of course, is the managing partner at LRV Health. LRV Health has raised its most recent funds from payers and providers. So it really looks across the healthcare spectrum, both medtech and digital health, to find ways for its LPs to save money and to improve care. So we'll talk with Tripp about how he came to know Cleerly Health and about how he helped put the syndicate together. Let's hear from Tripp. Well, Tripp Peake, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Tom. It's glad to join you.
It's going to be great to kind of dig into your investment in Cleerly, but I want to first find out a little bit about yourself, how you came to be VC, and tell us a little bit about LRV.
Sure. I spent a number of years on the entrepreneur side, and then started working down with a company I created called Science Park Associates down in New Haven, Connecticut, which was really focused on spinning technology-based companies out of Yale. And that kind of put me into the venture world, in part building those companies and in part getting them financed, and got connected with a lot of the folks in the finance world. Started my own seed fund eventually, and that ended up merging in with a group in Boston called Kestrel Ventures, which had been around in Boston for a number of years, was a partner there, and then teamed up with my co-founder, Will Cowan, who had been in the healthcare space quite a while. And so we launched LRV in 2000, and off we went. And we're now on a fourth fund, and it's going great.
But this fund is different than past funds, right? In terms of where your capital is coming from. Who do you represent? Who do you invest on behalf of?
It was really sort of an evolution. Our first three funds, as we developed, this is our fourth fund. It's a little over 100 million. And the first three funds, we started to evolve a model where we had more and more strategic investors in the funds that were limited partners. And we kind of put that on steroids, if you will, in this fourth fund. And so our current investor base is all institutional funds, institutional players in the healthcare world. Mm-hmm. There's a total of 22, 17 of them are provider systems of different sizes all around the country. And what's interesting about them is because they're different sizes in different parts of the country is that they have, all kinds of different populations that they serve. They all work under different different payment models. They all slightly different missions and communities they work with. So it gives us a really good insight to, what's going on in the delivery of healthcare all across the country. And we have a couple of payers, and we have a couple of big vendors in the healthcare world as well. So the entire fund is funded by strategic investors who are interested in a return on investment, but also interested in the strategic insights they can get.
Talk to me then about the flow of innovation or information and potential deals from the hospitals. Do they send ideas to you like, look, we need this is what we need, or look at this company? Or are you really out there in the wilderness foraging and bringing things back to them and saying, how's this look? Is this something you could use?
Well, there's a little bit of both. One thing about being connected to the incumbents and the players in the healthcare world is, and we're a little different in that we've built out an operating model where we spend a lot of time with the operators in those places, whether it's the chief medical officers, the chief strategy officers, the heads of innovation, really from the C-suite across the board. And that helps us form investment theses. And those theses are really what we then go out and look for, or our guideposts for what we're looking for from an investment point of view. So it's a real opportunity to sort of listen to where their needs are. We also add our own viewpoint of where we think the future is going to be. And we develop those ideas of where we should be investing the dollars. That has a natural flow that from there, we both find things that might be of interest to them and bring that back to them. They also are aware of what those theses are and often originate deals that that they think are interesting as well. So it kind of goes both ways.
Okay. Well, let's talk specifically then about we have your perspective. Let's talk specifically about what you're looking for in the device diagnostic space. I know you do digital health as well, but this is device talk, so I want to focus on that. And I think it would help everyone to understand what Cleerly Health does. Can you tell us a little bit about the company?
Yeah, Cleerly Health has developed a new coronary artery disease care pathway. And that care pathway is based on being able to very quickly, within a matter of minutes, interpret CT scans and be able to understand the plaque burden. And that plaque burden is not only quantity of plaque, but the characteristics of plaque. And of course, these are the real causes of coronary artery disease. Heart flow and many of the other players out there are certainly there's measurements of the flow of blood, which is a proxy for heart disease, but the real cause of heart disease ties back to plaque. So this was the first time that you were able to rapidly and quickly do a full analysis of that plaque and the problems presented by that plaque. And then from there, risk stratify patients, figure out which patients are under the most risk, and from there sort of have an impact and a change on how you take care of those patients and treat patients. And the kind of the vision that struck us originally from Dr. Min's work was that you can begin to think of managing heart disease sort of a little bit of the way that we think about some cancers, where we are whether it's colonoscopy or mammograms, that we sort of check in on a regular basis, and we can watch the progression of patients. And then we know that patients need to either change behaviors or go on therapeutics or whatever. And I think we can make a real dent in heart disease and heart attacks.
So not to sound cynical, but when you look at these investments or these companies that are looking for investment, and you see a technology like this one, just broadly a diagnostic that can help you manage a chronic and deadly disease, are you looking at it the prism from this will help save lives, or from the prism this will help our investors save money, save costs? And I know they're not mutually exclusive, but I'm just kind of wondering what's the first thing that really that drives you? Is it the life-saving aspect or the economic aspect, or can we not separate the two?
We don't separate the two. I mean, our view is we're trying to, as a firm, we have a mission, and the mission of our firm is to improve healthcare and improve the healthcare delivery, the healthcare systems, the way that patients and the way the entire system works. And when you do that, you're often going with the flow. Sometimes you're going against the flow. In terms of current practices. So we always have a viewpoint towards where can we make these improvements in healthcare or have an impact in healthcare. And often they are also, we believe, down the road, good places to make money and to be good investments. So we don't think they're mutually exclusive at all. In fact, I think, they reinforce each other. You certainly, and Cleerly is a good example, certainly you have to navigate the way the healthcare payments are made, and you have to navigate the current practices with all that. And you may, for example, find a place where you can save cost and improve lives immediately. Sometimes you may have to get into a mode where you're working with the payers around their lowering costs. So there's, I think, a lot of angles that all med device companies have to navigate in terms of, are they part of reimbursement? Are they part of, an improvement in a lowering cost? Are they, where do they sort of fit into the payment scheme for sure?
Gotcha. So let's just talk then about your due diligence process. How do you go about examining a company like Cleerly Health?
Well, Cleerly is a good example of two things coming together. Where you asked earlier about, sort of deal flow. So Cleerly had two things going for it. One from the start. One was we had a thesis around new care pathways for heart disease. So we were already looking in CV for some opportunities. And this was a sort of category that we had been thinking about. In the meantime, we also Cleerly specifically was referred to us by one of our investors. And one of those investors' systems, has a heart institute that's part of what they do. And some of the leading people there had begun to talk to Cleerly, and we're really impressed with them. So, it's a good jumpstart in that they were already working with them. They understood the value proposition, and they could feed that back to us and talk to us about that. So, and then from there, our due diligence is pretty extensive. We spent a lot of time with the company. We spent a lot of time going back into the various touch points we have in our healthcare systems who are part of our fund, but we also have other networks that we tap into. So, the due diligence process is quite long and lots of conversations with people. And then, in a situation, I think with device and diagnostics, you're also doing a lot of work on the intellectual property, the technology itself, et cetera. So it was definitely a long process, and Cleerly held up all the way through.
So I was curious, how long do you think this took from your first introduction to signing a term sheet? Over a year, under a year, months?
It was actually about a year from the first introduction. The first 4 or 5 months were really just getting to know the company a little bit, and the company itself was just beginning to pull the fundraising together. So there was kind of a lag time anyway that was natural for the company. And then there was a phase where we worked very hard on it and geared up. And then part of that was also, as the investor syndicate came together, we began to share due diligence and work together as an investor group. So the co-investors on this opportunity with Cleerly are Vensana, which is a great firm that we've gotten to know, and Justin Klein is the lead there, and New Leaf, who we had done some deals with in the past. Wow. And so the three of us also came together in the last probably 2 to 3 months of the diligence process and shared that work together. So that sped things up.
I'd love to know how. So were you doing your due diligence first, and then they were doing it separately, and then you sort of all shared notes? Is that how it
Correct.
worked? Okay.
Yeah,
excellent.
Pretty much.
Yep. So, and how many times, and I'm asking this just so people listening understand what VCs require, how many conversations do you have with James and the team? Are you checking in weekly, a couple of times a month? Are you just popping in, or are these large conference calls where everyone's in the room at once and kind of getting it all done in an hour or so?
Well, there's a lot. There's all the above is going to be the answer. So, we've probably spent, typically, and I think Cleerly followed the same pathway that many of our deals do, which is that, you're probably going to spend anywhere from a half a dozen to 10 sort of sessions with the founder and CEO, and then added to that, sessions with other people on the team. And so that's, can be as many as a dozen or 15. And then we often have topical discussions, and we've done that a couple of times with everybody in the room, including the other co-investors. So you often have, we did some deeper dives on certain parts of the company or certain aspects of their go-to-market strategy or their technology. And we will do that as a big group. So there can be, as many as 15 or 20 sessions with the company on the way to getting to a deal. Interesting.
And I'm curious how much of this process is also evaluating the other investors. You've just come to know Justin. I've known him for a time, and Vijay as well. But you have to be comfortable with these people. You're going to be in business with them for a little while.
Yeah, we all have to be comfortable with each other, and I think this one worked out great. And I think one of the things behind the scenes that I think entrepreneurs who have some experience know is that both the quality and the ability of your syndicate to work together and be productive together is a big factor that sort of sits behind the scenes. And it's important to have everybody adding value, adding their perspective, disagreeing where there's places to disagree, agreeing and aligned around where you go forward when you build that alignment, and having alignment of interest to support the company is absolutely key. And we have a lot of conversations along the way with folks like Justin and Vijay to get to that point. Knowing of them and knowing them a bit from the past helps. But I think this one came together great. Really enjoy working with those guys and really looking forward to it.
That's great. And just the final question, what was what gave you the green light? Like, what did you see? What was the final missing piece? What made you decide there was a go point, or are you sort of in go mode the entire time and waiting for a red light to sort of stop you?
Yeah, I think what typically happens, and I think Cleerly it was true for Cleerly as well, is that you have both a lot of things that you're checking out and thinking through that you really like and are attractive about the opportunity. And then you have some other things that are risks in the opportunity or issues in the opportunity that you're running to the ground. And you're trying to either make sure that those risks, aren't bigger than you think or not different than you think. And then you're also spending time figuring out how with the company to mitigate those risks. And I think for us with Cleerly, the feedback we got from different parts of the market, as you'll hear from Jim, they have some opportunities in the private pay market. They have some opportunities in the self-insured employer market, the population health market, and they'll also be working towards reimbursement in a fee-for-service world. So when you look at all that, we wanted to validate that there were opportunities for the company sort of in all those places and all those markets, and we got that. So as we continue to do our work and get that validation, I think that's when we started to get to go time.
That's terrific. All right. Well, this has been I know I'm asking you some basic questions, but I appreciate your patience, and it's great to sort of understand the process a bit more, really get down in the trenches. Tripp, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
All right, next up, we're going to hear from Justin Klein. Justin is a co-founder and managing partner at Vensana Capital, as I mentioned up top. Justin formed Vensana with Kirk Nielsen. Kirk left Versant Ventures. Justin previously had been at NEA. They both left their firms to create Vensana, which really invests in sort of mid to late stage medtech companies, growth capital as well. So Justin is a very astute investor. He did really well at NEA. And you might remember from our conversation with James Min, the CEO of Cleerly Health, he had said he really connected with one of the VCs who had an MD and a JD, and that was Justin Klein. So Justin is, again, super insightful. Great to have him on the program. We'll talk about how he came to know about Cleerly Health and what went into bringing the syndicate together. So let's hear from Justin Klein. Justin Klein, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here with you, as always. Appreciate it.
Well, let's talk a bit about Cleerly Health. I'm curious to know, how did you first come to know about the company? And specifically, I want to know, how do, we always have folks like yourselves up in a panel. How do you find deals is kind of a common question. So this is kind of a really single data point on that question. How did you find this deal in particular?
Yeah, so this one was actually an introduction that a friend of mine, Seth Demergy, who heads medtech banking at UBS, made. He had been spending time in the broader category, kind of medical device and digital health, and met Jim. I think hearing the pitch and Jim's vision for the company and the opportunity, and recognizing they were early in their process of raising a Series B round, thought that Jim and I would get along really well and we'd be a good fit together. And so he connected us, and he was right. It was a great match. If you've spoken with Jim or spent time, you'll learn that Jim can fit about 1,000 words per minute, and it'll take time to sort of fully digest, what Jim is describing and offering, and how he has a vision for Cleerly. But in spending that time together, I've really grown to appreciate the depth of his vision for this opportunity. And it was a good fit for us and our firm, and how we see opportunities in kind of the intersection of medical devices and related procedures and digital health opportunities. So we were really excited that Seth connected us, and we're excited to be involved with the company now.
That's great to hear. Jim had mentioned his connection with you as well as one of the reasons he enjoyed working with Vensana. So apparently there was a VC connection there, which is always nice to hear. How, when you first look at a deal, and again, let's focus on Cleerly Health, that first impression, is it talking to the CEO and just getting a sense of who that person is? Are you listening more for that, or are you listening more for the work that they're doing? And I'm sure it's a mix of both. So which weighs heavier in your kind of walking away from that first conversation and saying, I want to hear more?
Yeah, I think particularly for an early stage investment opportunity, we are listening to the entrepreneur and trying to understand who they are and how they think. I think most important, we're trying to understand the insight they have into some particular market need, and whether it's clinical or commercial or everything in between. It's really important that we believe they've had experiences and they have a depth of insight into the unmet need and the best way in which it could be solved, and they're applying that in their work with this startup. From there, we think a lot about the path ahead, of course, and we could spend more time talking about all the things we diligence to get comfortable with making an investment. But in that first meeting, it's really about trying to understand whether this person has unique insight and is applying that in a way that could enable a really compelling, technology or business service that goes at solving that problem.
That's interesting. I mean, it sounds almost akin to a job interview. You want to know how this person is going to be to work with and how they're going to react to things and where they see themselves going forward. So let's talk then about the due diligence. So you had the first conversation, you connected that you realized there was a potential there for an investment. How do you go about vetting this particular opportunity?
Well, to maybe give a little context, maybe I could describe what I think Cleerly is doing, and then how we sort of went about fully understanding it and thinking about how it could become a business. Through Jim's work in cardiology, he's really become one of the experts in the field of cardiac CT and frankly broader imaging technologies, but particularly deep in cardiac CT, which we recognize is an imaging modality that's gaining in its credibility for how it can be used and applied in clinical management of coronary artery disease, as well as some other structural heart indications. Jim also understood, that there are certain technology constraints around cardiac CT, and interpretation and the work associated with that is painstaking, even for expert readers. But that by applying, technologies like machine vision and artificial intelligence, you could automate a lot of the process or simplify, make more efficient the process of analyzing, interpreting, and reporting on cardiac CT in a way that makes it much more user-friendly, for the clinical environment. So I think that's the first piece of what Cleerly has done really well. They've developed a technology platform with software that really facilitates wider spread use of cardiac CT, which has clear benefits around managing patients with coronary artery disease. I think the second thing that they've done that's very compelling is how they've applied insight they've gained from proprietary data sets that allowed them to look at a cardiac CT and analyze it completely, but then also have even deeper insight into what's going on for a patient in their current health status, but also the risk factors associated with their coronary artery disease and how it's characterized. And so longer term, this is more than just a workflow tool, which we think is in and of itself very valuable, and it helps facilitate the go-to-market. But there's so much more that we can get out of cardiac CT than people get today, based on the insights that Jim has, the ways in which the field is validating the use of cardiac CT. Mm-hmm. That we think there are multiple ways in which this can be commercialized over time.
And where does that recognition of potential come from? Does it come from your conversations with Jim, or did you glean this from conversations with folks with whom you've done due diligence and talked to them about this idea and this concept?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think in the broader context of understanding how widely used imaging is in guiding medical procedures, we recognize it's becoming an enabling technology for a lot of different interventions, with patients and how we manage patients. It's broadly a secular trend that we see underpinning a lot of growth opportunities across medtech, including medical device and products and procedures. Mm-hmm. I think part of that too is the fact that people are getting a lot more sophisticated applying things like machine learning and artificial intelligence to the field of radiology and imaging to derive even more insight and value into these traditional, imaging studies that we now can do more with. So against that backdrop, we've been looking at the broader field. I think Jim brought greater focus to our attention on cardiovascular disease, in particular coronary artery disease, and thinking carefully through, the paradigm around managing patients who are presenting with active chest pain, as well as those that may be at risk for coronary artery disease and asymptomatic or not presenting as such clinically, but nevertheless, what a poor job our system does in identifying those patients and figuring out who needs to be managed medically more aggressively and who doesn't. So thinking about just broader, the resource utilization and ways in which our healthcare system could do much better having insight, and the ways in which diagnostics like Cleerly mm-hmm. could help improve that. Jim is Jim is the expert in this field, in my opinion. So, his depth of knowledge and the way in which he educated us were, first in a lot of ways that we then, through our diligence process, explored with his peers. And, both experts in academia and at the society level and leadership in fields like cardiology or cardiovascular imaging, and then also on the industry side as well. We talked to a lot of folks with responsibility for these product lines and business units and how they see, this intersection of imaging and therapy evolving over time.
Great. No, he's an impressive fellow for sure. So you identify this as a company you want to be an investor in. What is the next step for a firm? How do you make your interest known, and how does the syndicate begin to get assembled? I was going to say, how do you start assembling a syndicate? But I don't even know if you sort of initiate it or if the company itself is sort of bringing potential co-investors together.
Yeah, so it can happen in all of the above. Yeah, at Vensana, we have led or co-led every financing that we've participated in. And so we're accustomed to leading with a term sheet, frequently, leaving room in a financing proposal that we would lead for existing investors and then also new investors. And we always try to work collaboratively with a company and their board and their investor syndicate to fill out financings with folks we think would add a lot of value to the project. In this particular case, the company was running a financing process, and so it was a competitive deal, and we were fortunately selected for our term sheet. And similar to what I just described, that included room for follow-on investment from the existing investors. And then we, with the company, after agreeing to the sort of parameters of the financing, engaged with them further, including some of the investors they were talking to as part of their financing process. Then we introduced them to some others that we thought would be particularly interested and good partners for this deal. So in the case of Cleerly, we did a bit of all of the above that you're describing.
What are the benefits to leading or co-leading a deal, all of your deals? I would imagine that there's some instances where maybe it's better to be in the backseat as opposed to leading all the time, or is it why is it your preference to lead or co-lead a deal?
In general, it helps ensure that we're going to be in a position to work closely with the board and management team over the long term. And so we like to lead because it's one of the best ways in which we can crystallize our view of a company and its opportunity, and then the strategic direction and operating plan, you should line up against that to go execute against. And then ensure that as we, build a syndicate, we're working directly with that company to find like-minded investors that see it similarly. We do join the board of every company we invest in, at least we have to date. And I think, frankly, in our prior roles at Versant and NEA, we were probably on nearly every board of every deal that we led.
Sure.
And so it's just a natural role for us. And as such, I think leading a financing is sort of part of that process that allows you to establish those relationships and, that role with the company.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this syndicate and how did the players come together? Did you, we talked earlier, or you mentioned earlier that it could be a mix of you're finding people and the company having people. Can you speak specifically to how this syndicate came together?
Yeah, so with Jim and the board, when we had agreed to Vensana leading the Series B, we then kind of penciled out the target size of the round, our participation in that, what the existing investors had an appetite to do, and then we thought about how to identify other investors that might want to join, whether they would also either join the board or be board observers. We kind of think about all these things, and sort of systematically, developed a list of investors that we wanted to work with. And in several cases, the company had some dialogue with them. In other cases, they were new introductions that we made after signing the term sheet. And because we had been a lead, and we tend to complete nearly all of our diligence before providing a term sheet, so that the company can rely on that term sheet and know that we're serious. We then kind of work with each of these potential investors who join the syndicate to complete their own diligence. Some of that leveraging our work. In other cases, they're doing their own independent diligence, and we will be supportive whenever we can. In this particular project, we syndicated the financing with LRV Health and New Leaf Partners and Digitex and a strategic that each of whom has great depth of experience in related areas, whether it's diagnostics or healthcare IT and workflow solutions like Cleerly can be, or in other cases, particularly like with this payer, around value-based care paradigms and thinking about how to more efficiently manage resources used in cardiovascular disease. So we've got a great syndicate that's come together for this one. A few of us are taking board seats. A couple of people are going to be board observers, and then from there, we've further focused on building out the board and looking for some independent directors to join us that aren't affiliated with either the investors or the company, but again, bring a unique perspective and skill set to the board that'll fundamentally help both the board and the management team go execute on the vision.
So did you make the initial connection with, did you bring all of these co-investors in, or was it a mix?
It was a mix.
Okay.
It was a mix. I think in the case of LRV, we reached out to them directly. In the case of New Leaf, I've known Vijay for a long time, but he had also been introduced to the company as part of their financing process and had dialogue with them. Same thing with Digitex. David Kim, I've known for a really long time and worked with previously, but had also heard about the company separately, and pretty early in the process expressed interest in participating in the round. So we were excited to have all three join. In the final case of the strategic, that actually grew out of an active dialogue that the company had been having with that strategic in their business unit, and their venture group got engaged in parallel, and ultimately he wanted to invest alongside of us. And
you hadn't worked with LRV before. What is that process
That's
like?
Right.
Connecting with a new investor. You've been investing in this industry for a while. You know a lot of people. I imagine it's probably easier just to invest with people for whom you already know. What's the process like to talking to someone new and deciding you need to work with them? Is it very much like interviewing or meeting a CEO of a potential investment, or is it a different conversation?
Well, like happens in a lot of cases, we were introduced by a mutual friend, another head of a venture firm in the healthcare IT space that has worked with both of us, and thought that for this particular project, LRV and members of the team there would be really ideally positioned to add a lot of value on the board. LRV also has a really interesting LP base that includes a number of strategics in the healthcare space that frankly do get involved and help a number of LRV's companies either pilot new technologies or service offerings. And frankly, they do a lot to help build these businesses through those relationships. And so, in the process of reaching out and getting connected with Tripp, who is LRV's board representative at Cleerly, just built a good relationship, largely based on what we were seeing and thinking about actively with Cleerly as a company, where the opportunities are, where the needs are for the business, but then more broadly, just talking about our approach to funding companies and serving on boards. And, I think frankly found a lot of alignment in how we approach questions like that. So having shared values on these things is fundamentally important, I think, to finding, good compatibility.
And just final question: Where do you see Cleerly Health becoming?
Well, we think Cleerly has some utility, certainly on the workflow front. As I described, cardiac CT is steadily gaining in favor with all of the leading cardiovascular societies globally, as well as in the U.S. It's becoming, frankly, increasingly regarded as a standard of care or the preferred imaging modality of choice for managing patients with stable chest pain. we think that further as value-based care paradigms evolve and become more important relative to fee-for-service, this can be a cornerstone technology to enabling, much more efficient use of resources in managing patients with coronary artery disease. I think the same opportunity holds in some other areas relating to structural heart disease, relating to valves and other conditions for which cardiac CT is being frequently used for the quality of its imaging. And I think, when you're getting a cardiac CT, there's so much information that can be mined out of that for the benefit of the patient, multiple indications. It's a pretty compelling, opportunity. I think longer term clearly has an opportunity to further define a new paradigm around which we have better methods for assessing risk in patients and developing prognostics around coronary artery disease. And when you think about coronary artery disease being one of the, or maybe the leading killer of people, not only in the United States, but in every country around the world, at every sort of economic tier, it is a massive unmet need. And we can absolutely do a better job of managing risk associated with CAD, and whether it's putting the right patients on optimized medical therapy or more closely watching patients at greater risk of having future events. There's a lot we can do to improve outcomes and reduce cost in this category. And I think Cleerly has the opportunity to drive a lot of that paradigm.
Excellent. Great thoughts. Great insights. Appreciate the look inside, and thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks, Tom. We certainly appreciate it, and look forward to our next opportunity together too.
All right, it was great to hear more about Cleerly Health. And now, Chris Newmarker, you know what time it is.
It is time for the social media. You can find me on LinkedIn, Chris Newmarker, just like a new marker. And I'm on Twitter at Newmarker, always happy to talk to people.
Awesome. And I am on LinkedIn, Tom, SALEMI. I'm on Twitter at medtech Tom. And like Chris said, it's great to talk to folks. If you do share this podcast episode, we certainly hope you do. Please connect Chris and myself to those posts so we can be part of those conversations. And of course, please do subscribe to the Device Talks Weekly podcast. You can find that on all major podcast channels, Apple, Google, Spotify, the works, we're everywhere. So please do connect to the Device Talks Weekly podcast. If you subscribe, it's sent directly to your listening device as soon as it comes out. I don't know why you would want to wait.
Like, follow, subscribe.
There it is. There it is. We need stickers. We need some merchandise, Chris, with that on there. Right. And you can also find our Medtronic Talks podcast on those channels as well. Yeah. So subscribe to that.
Yeah,
also.
Tom, when am I going to get some Device Talks bling? Merch. Device Talks merch. I'll take merch.
I think we need to talk with the folks in marketing. I think we definitely
need some merch, man.
Need some t-shirts. We need some stickers.
That's right.
Need some mugs.
Got to represent.
That's right.
That's right.
I think that's a great idea, Chris. Why don't we get working on that right after we're done with this podcast?
Let's do it.
All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in to the Device Talks Weekly podcast. Tune in, and next week we'll have another great episode of this podcast waiting for you.
Hey, stay safe. Get vaccinated soon. Enjoy the summer.